Well, that brings up an issue that you have unquestioned credibility on, and that is the issue of religious liberty. I think a lot of us watched in horror as the nine unelected judges, well, five unelected
Yeah.
judges, fundamentally changed what the meaning of marriage is in this country, and then even those who dissented in that pointed out quickly the religious liberty implications of that decision. What could you do as president of the United States to defend religious liberty in this country?
Well, I'd make sure I had an attorney general and a justice department who was dispatched anywhere in the country where people's religious liberty were being trampled, whether it was a Kentucky county clerk, whether it was a florist in Washington, whether it was a photographer in New Mexico. The Justice Department would be there to defend the First Amendment guarantee of religious liberty, not to join in and actually pummel the religious liberty rights of people. That would be fundamental. And the second thing I would do is to make clear that the court can't make law. You just don't have the power at the Supreme Court to make a law.
Well,
You can
what
rule that one
recourse
is
do we
invalid.
have? Though, you know what I mean? Like right now, it's basically they are the final word on everything. Is that what the founders intended? I mean, what can you
It's
do
not
to?
only, yeah, not only is it not what they intended, it's not what's written in the
Mhm.
Constitution. This is a relatively new idea that the courts rule and we just throw up our hands and say it's the law of the land. And we've listened to that and accepted it because, frankly, of political cowardice. People in the other two branches of government who didn't want to take the political risk of taking a side on an issue were just to pretend that the Supreme Court could settle it and that's it. But the Supreme Court can only rule, they can't implement it. Jackson understood this, Jefferson understood this, Madison, Hamilton, Lincoln, all of them were very clear. People need to go back and not only read, of course, certainly the Constitution itself and who can make law, who can actually create legislation. The Supreme Court cannot. Jefferson said that leads to judicial tyranny and that you make the Constitution a thing of wax. But what should be happening is if the court rules, let's say on same-sex marriage, the president says we appreciate the decision, and now we'll turn it to the people's elected representatives and let them determine do they agree with that constitutional interpretation, and if they do, then write the statutory details that will tell us how to implement this. Because right now it is exactly what the four dissenting justices predicted. They said that it would create an unbelievable upheaval in our entire social structure because nobody knows how to make this applicable. The courts rule on something, and you don't just go out and immediately implement it because there's no one who has described how this is to be implemented. I'll give an example. When I was governor, the state Supreme Court ruled on school finance, and they ruled that our system of financing education was unconstitutional. I read their ruling. I agreed with them. They were right. But we didn't start sending out different checks the next day because, quite frankly, I didn't have the legal authority to order that until the legislature and I met and came up with a funding formula that we could agree to. Only then, when those with the power of the purse, the Congress, and those with the power of the sword, the executive branch, were in agreement, could you put into operation a court decision because there has to be separation of powers, checks and balances, accountability, and agreement. Otherwise, you have utter chaos, which is what we've created in our form of government today.
So it sounds like you're advocating for okay, this ruling comes down from the Supreme Court on the state level, say here in Alabama. Okay, we hear you, Supreme Court. Let's put this up to a vote of the people. I think we know what happens in a state like Alabama if the people vote on it. That goes down. At that point, are you saying that you would be in favor of at the state level, the state looking back at the Supreme Court and saying, "Look, we put this to a vote of the people. The people said no, and therefore we are not going to abide by this Supreme Court ruling"?
That's exactly what I would do.
Gotcha.
I would absolutely do that because what we have now is a court that's out of control without the authority or the power to make that happen.